Good afternoon, and welcome to the Encompas Mental Health and Communication series. I am Teresa Goodwin, and on behalf of the Encompas team, it is a pleasure to welcome back our speaker today in what is the second of a three-part series on sleep. I would like to remind everyone that today's session will be 75 minutes long, as this is a very important topic when considering your overall health and well-being. We wanted to make sure to provide everybody ample opportunity to listen to Dr. Landry deliver this meaningful content. We are pleased to welcome back Dr. Landry. Dr. Landry is a sleep scientist with over 20 years of study and experience in this important field. He completed his graduate research at Simon Fraser University and then focused his research efforts on sleep, aging, and cognition at the University of British Columbia. Dr. Landry is now in private practice as a sleep coach and educator. He also does an amazing job of translating the science into meaningful, understandable concepts that allow us to address our sleep challenges. And finally, by way of introduction, I wanted to say that he has done a lot of amazing beneficial work with first responders and brings this knowledge and expertise to his sessions with us. We are pleased to have him here with us sharing his expertise. Dr. Landry, just before I turn it over to you, I have a couple of housekeeping points. We purposely disabled all of the cameras and microphones so that everyone can participate anonymously. We will record the presentation and host it on the Encompas site to enable access for those who have missed it today or just want to watch it again. We will have questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So along the way, if you have any questions, please submit it to us. The Encompas team will read them out at the end around the 2 p.m. mark. We'll go into the questions and answers. So with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Landry.
Thanks so much for that. So just to confirm, I want to make sure that everybody's seeing the screen, or Teresa, you can see the screen now that I'm sharing?
I can see it.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thanks so much for having me back. So we are into talk number 2 now, and really, and one thing to mention, if you missed the first talk on sleep matters, please feel free to catch up on that. It's been recorded and made available to everybody through Encompas. So today's session, we're really going to be addressing a number of issues in terms of, why you might not be able to get the sleep that we've talked about. But first, let's review one part, and that is, I call it elite sleep. And what do I mean by elite sleep? One of the things that we talked about in the previous session was, Fitbit, and how the technology today gives us insight into objective measures of our sleep health status. And so one of the real values there is, when we talk about sleep health, it's not just how many hours you sleep but it's the actual sleep architecture. What does your sleep look like in terms of the different stages of sleep and the sequencing of those stages? And what we really want to see for elite sleep, and again, this is my sleep, not a surprise here, trained professional. I work really hard to make sure that I get the sleep I need. A couple of things to note here is you'll see that, and we covered this in the previous session, we have a family history of Alzheimer's disease. So I work hard to protect a longer sleep window than most. You can see I'm going to bed around 10 o'clock and getting up around 7. So that's a 9-hour sleep window. And I do that because, the science has now shown that if you have, in our case, this family history of Alzheimer's, if you're among the best sleepers, an elite sleeper, it can actually negate the impact of having that gene. So I can overcome my genetic predisposition toward Alzheimer's. And so I protect this long sleep window. But what's really important to notice here is that my brain and my body are ready for sleep at the time that I've scheduled my sleep. And this comes from having a routine sleep window and doing the things necessary. One of the things that we'll be talking about in today's talk, as well as the one to follow, is that we need to build a sleep window and protect that sleep window in order for our brain and body to be prepared for that sleep window and make the most of it. And now I realize many of you are shift workers and you're thinking to yourself, well, how can I do that in a shift work paradigm? It is entirely possible. We'll be covering that somewhat in today's talk, but mostly in the next session when we talk about circadian rhythms being the secret to sleep health. Again, what makes this elite sleep isn't just that I'm spending 9 hours and getting 8 hours of actual sleep. It's that my brain's ready for sleep when I schedule it. And so I fall quickly into sleep. And then I'm able to spend the majority of this first half in a particular stage of sleep. Fitbit calls it deep sleep, but this is slow wave sleep. And slow wave sleep is the sleep, if you remember from that first talk, it's the sleep that washes the brain of the day's waste. So the brain's like an engine, it's producing exhaust, and slow wave sleep is the sleep that washes away the day's waste. And then in the back half, I am able to use that well-washed brain to consolidate learning and memory, to process the day. Light sleep, again, I'm reviewing from the previous session, but light sleep is that sleep that processes the day, goes through, identifies the things that must be remembered, the things that have been tagged as this is important for future success, and then sorts that out and prioritizes that for consolidation of learning and memory. Light sleep's important for skill acquisition, think muscle memory. And REM sleep is important for also consolidation of learning and memory, but a different form. Think of it as knowledge acquisition. And also REM sleep plays a huge role, and we did talk about this last session, but a huge role in processing trauma, removing the negative emotional tag that's associated with a new learning event so that we can relive that event without the sympathetic nervous system overdrive that was originally attached to that event. And so this allows us to build resilience to trauma and to improve our capacity to go through our days, and the things that wouldn't normally bother us, instead of them being hugely impactful, think anger management now, when we get the REM sleep we need, we're able to process that without the huge emotional reactivity that would be, otherwise attached to it. And so little things don't bother us so much. And that's a key part. And, all of the stressors that we face, when we get the sleep we need, we're better able to address that. Okay, so that's what shooting. And what I want to just remind everyone is that, Fitbit's not perfect. It's far from perfect, but it is best in class in terms of providing this sleep architecture. But I would like to, remind everyone, we don't want to become slaves to the Fitbit data. What we want to do is use it as a tool just to get some insight into how we're actually sleeping, get an idea of, whether or not our sleep architecture is staged properly and how much of deep versus REM sleep we're getting. This is important, but not to become a slave to it. It's just giving us a tool to give us some insight. All right, so this is the target. Again, the target that I'm setting here is for elite sleep. This is, my sleep again, but overall, you can see that I'm shooting for something in the neighborhood of, 90 minutes to 2 hours of REM. I'm shooting for at least an hour to an hour and a half of deep sleep. And then I want, half of my sleep, roughly a 4-hour window of light sleep. And remember one thing here, light sleep is a misnomer. It's not poor sleep. Light sleep is just, it gets its name because it's easier to wake up someone from that stage of sleep. So our arousal threshold in light sleep is much, much lower than it is in deep or maybe REM. Another key here is that the time that I spend awake is minimal. Here in this example, I'm only awake for 7%. That's really high sleep efficiency. It means that I'm, getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 93% sleep efficiency. That's really high. You want to be shooting for anywhere between, anything above 90% sleep efficiency is awesome. And so for a target, again, just to summarize, about 90 minutes to 2 hours of REM on a nightly basis, about 60 minutes to 90 minutes of deep sleep, 4 hours of light if you can, and shooting for a sleep efficiency somewhere between, let's say, 87 to 90%, something in that range. Okay, now if you aren't getting that, there's probably a number of factors that are driving your sleep health in terms of whether or not you're getting the sleep you need. And one of those factors can be, just simple aging. We've known for decades that sleep changes as a normal course of aging. But what I would like you to keep in mind is that normal doesn't necessarily mean healthy. And what we now know in the sleep science is that, yes, sleep changes as a normal course of aging, but that isn't necessarily healthy. And more importantly, it need not be inevitable. In today's session, as well as tomorrow's, or not tomorrow, but the next session, on June 22nd, in that session, we'll really be focusing on the things that you can do to address your sleep health status and improve it. But today we really want to focus on things that are having a negative impact. And so aging is one of those things. What we can say is that, and again, we've known this for decades, the science is very clear on this, but as we get older, we see decreased quantity of sleep. So the person could spend, let's say, 8 hours in bed, but getting nowhere near 8 hours of actual sleep. So the amount of sleep decreases. But not only that, the quality of the sleep decreases, and I'll show you that in slides to come. One of the factors is that as we get older, our ability to sustain sleep and consolidate a bout of sleep becomes impaired. And the reverse of that is what we call fragmentation. And that's really what happens, is that we tend to wake up more often through the night. And those awakenings as we get older lengthen. It takes longer and longer for us to get back to sleep. And all of these things actually, they drive decreased sleep efficiency. And when I say sleep efficiency, what I really mean, you can think of that as the percent of time that you're actually sleeping for the amount of time that you spend in bed. So earlier I showed you on that slide that, when you're sleeping really well, you could be shooting for a sleep efficiency of around 90%. That's excellent sleep efficiency. Anything below that, is a flag that you may want to be addressing. And certainly anything below 80% sleep efficiency is something that you want to target and improve. So here's an example. Now, this isn't Fitbit data. This is back when I was at UBC. And you could think of this as a research grade Fitbit. Wasn't actually a Fitbit device, but these devices called the Motion Watch, they were used then because they provided an estimate, a validated estimate of what your polysomnography would look like in a sleep lab. And so if you went to the sleep lab and we hooked you up with the PSG machine and, had electrodes on your scalp to measure the staging of sleep, this device here, the Motion Watch, would give us an estimate of what that data would look like in terms of 3 important factors. The first is sleep duration. So how much sleep you're actually getting for the amount of time that you are in bed. Sleep efficiency, again, the percent of time that you're sleeping for the amount of time that you're in bed. And then fragmentation, that's the opposite, if you will, of sleep consolidation. Fragmentation is the frequency of sleep disruption. And so what we see in this data, so each horizontal row here is a 24-hour day and night. The pink shaded area is the time during which the individual is actually trying to sleep, and we have a number of cross validations to make sure that this is the actual sleep window for the individual. So first, they would press a button on their motion watch to say, Glenn, I am going to sleep right now. And then in the morning, when they finish trying to sleep, they would press a button again, saying essentially that they have finished trying to sleep. We also had sensors that would provide validation of that sleep window. And so what you're seeing, again, this is 2 weeks of data. The black vertical deflections are the motion that's captured by the motion watch. And now what I want you to see here in this example, this is an example of very good sleep quality for an older adult. This is not typical, but you can see the individual, they have roughly an 8-hour sleep window, just a little bit more than that. And they're getting over 7.5 hours of that is actual sleep. A sleep efficiency of 93%. This is incredibly high. And their fragmentation is very, very low. This is an index, but anything below 20 is pretty good. Anything below 15 is amazing. So this is a really solid sleeper. What this shows you is that it is possible to be an older adult and get great sleep, but not reflective of the average for an older adult. This next data set shows you more of what we would typically see in older adults. The first thing to notice here, we did try to match it in terms of the sleep, the window that the person is in bed. But what you can see here, when we look at the full sleep window, this individual is in bed for roughly the same amount of time, just over 8 hours. But you can see right here that they're getting just over 6 hours of actual sleep. So spending 8 hours in bed trying to sleep, but only getting about 6 hours or just over that. That relates to a sleep efficiency of just about 75%. This matters because sleep durations that are less than 7 hours and sleep efficiencies that are less than 80% are actually indicators of very poor sleep health, and that is a marker of accelerated aging. So we can see that the average older adult is not getting enough sleep. We'll talk more about this in the slides to come. One more thing to note is that the fragmentation is very, very high. Remember, I said that anything below 20 was good. This individual is highly fragmented sleep. And actually, we can see this when we break the sleep window into 2 halves. The front half of the sleep window looks very similar, with the exception of these bouts here. It looks very similar to good sleep or great sleep. The individual is able to get to sleep easily. And then for the first 3 to 4 hours, it's pretty good sleep. But it's this back half of the sleep window, and this is age-related change in sleep health status. But this back half, you can see the individual, once they've slept for 3 to 4 hours, they wake up. And from that point on, they're really having difficulty sustaining sleep and getting any kind of sleep quality. And so that's really a hallmark of age-related change in sleep health status. And this isn't just in motion watch data or Fitbit data that we can see this. When we have older adults come into the sleep lab and we compare older adults versus young adults in the sleep lab, this is some data using, again, polysomnography. But what we can see is that the individual spending, getting the same amount of time in bed, so an 8-hour sleep window roughly here, this is a total recording time. But when we look at the difference between older and younger adults, we can see that the older adults spending the same amount of time in bed, getting much less sleep. Their wakefulness is dramatically higher than the young adult. And again, you can see this, the total sleep time, just over 6 hours of actual sleep, whereas the young adult is almost getting 7.5 hours. Sleep efficiency, again, you can see here, just over 77%, but below 80%. So again, we see this hallmark for age-related change in sleep health, where they're getting less than 7 hours, well less than 7 hours of actual sleep each night. Their sleep efficiency below 80%. And again, these are predictive of accelerated aging and early cognitive decline. But the reason I'm showing you this slide is because I want you to notice in the previous data set with the motion watch, it did not say anything about the sleep architecture. It didn't have anything in terms of the sleep staging. But polysomnography gives us insight into that sleep architecture. And what you can see is that the main difference between older and younger adults is that older adults are getting much less of this slow wave sleep, in particular this stage 4, which is 100% slow wave. It's this lack of slow waves that is the marker for older adults versus younger adults in terms of the typical sleep health. What I'm showing you here is that not only are older adults getting less sleep, but they're actually not getting as much of this slow wave sleep, the stage 4. This is the stage of sleep, and we talked about this in the previous session. This is the stage of sleep that we now know is where the brain is washed. It's the mechanism of sleep that washes the brain of the day's waste. Again, like I said in the previous session, the brain's like an engine. It's producing exhaust or metabolites around neurons, and these accumulate. But slow wave sleep or stage 4 sleep washes away that accumulation so that we can begin the next day with a clean slate. What we see now in the science is that older adults, not only are they not getting as much sleep, but they aren't getting this critical stage of sleep that washes the brain. What I want you to understand is that this notion that older adults sleep less because they don't need as much sleep, that's a myth. We now know that older adults, they need as much sleep as a middle adult would. The issue is that sleep changes as a normal course of aging, and without intervention, we can see this acceleration. And when do these changes begin? Well, they actually begin in our 3rd decade. They're subtle changes at first, very subtle changes at first. But what we see is that beginning in our 30s, we begin to wake up a little bit more often than we otherwise would. When we're, in our 20s to our 30s, we're able to fall asleep and sleep the whole night through. However, there are these awakenings, but they're so brief. But as we get older, the awakenings begin to last a little bit longer. And we actually begin to remember in the morning that we were awake. If you notice in the morning that you know that you were awake once or twice throughout the night, you can be pretty sure that those awakenings lasted longer than 15 minutes. Typically, when we are awake for shorter than 10 to 15 minutes, we won't even be aware in the morning. It's not long enough for us to trigger a memory of that episode. But when we're awake for longer than 10 to 15 minutes, that is long enough for us to trigger a long-term consolidation of memory for that event. And so in the morning, we'll be aware of it. So if you think back to last night or the last week of sleeps, and you can remember having been awake several times, then you know that you could, add those up. It was at least a half or at least 15 minutes or half hour or whatever it might have been. And so you can subtract that from your sleep window, and you would know, that you're getting less sleep than just the amount of time that you spent in bed. Now, I'm not saying these things to stress you out. The very opposite, actually. I'm telling you these things so that you know that there are these normal changes that are associated with aging, but they need not be inevitable. There are things that we can do to fix that and to improve your sleep health as we get older. Here's an example of what it looks like with Fitbit data. This isn't just poor sleep, but there is this age-related component here. think again, the ability to fall asleep. But then what we see is that person wakes up and they're up for a long period of time. And then after having been up for a while, they can get back to sleep. So it breaks the sleep window into two halves, if you will. Okay, so that's how sleep can be impacted just as a normal course of aging, but there are so many other factors that play a role in our sleep health and can really alter our sleep. Now, most of this data I will be showing you here is Fitbit data. And again, Fitbit really is best in class in terms of sleep architecture because, yes, it is far from perfect, but it gives us insight into what your data would look like if you were in the sleep lab. It's not perfect, but what I can tell you is when we look at drugs and the impact that drugs have on sleep, the Fitbit data is reflective of what we know those drug impacts would be if you were in the sleep lab. So here's an example. This is a client, and this client, when they started with us, was using a combination of sleep aids as well as CBD to help them sleep. And so one of the things that you're going to see immediately is that this individual, well, first off, their sleep window going to bed around 2:30 in this example and getting up just before 8. So this is a short sleep window, taking them a long time to get to sleep. And then, only having roughly a 6.5 hour sleep window. But when you look at the sleep that they get, they spend almost all of that time actually sleeping. There's just this brief awakening here. So this is the impact of, the cocktail, if you will, of drugs where the person's able to sustain a sleep bout. But this is why I say that it's not just how many hours you spend sleeping, but it's the sleep architecture. And what we see, just so you know, this sleep aid that they're on, it actually promotes deep sleep. And so you can see that there are these long bouts of deep sleep here, these two bouts. But what's missing is REM sleep. There's not a lot of REM sleep in this bout, really only 6%, which we would typically expect to see REM to be about 20 to 25% of the sleep window. And the reason that REM is absent is that you're going to learn these are mutually exclusive stages. You can't be in deep sleep while also being in REM. And so when you take a drug and it has an impact of promoting deep sleep, what that drug's doing is also inhibiting REM. And then in this example, as I said, this is, a cocktail. There's a synergistic effect where the CBD is a REM depriver. So when you're on CBD, you're going to get much less REM. So this is an additive effect, if you will, where we get much less. If you're combining the sleep aid with CBD, you get much less REM. And so the individual has that sense that they've gotten sleep, they are getting some deep sleep, but they're not getting the REM that they would need. And so that's one example of, how drugs can impact our sleep architecture. Here's another drug that's commonly used by adults, alcohol. And in older adults, alcohol, unfortunately, is used often as a sleep aid. So they'll self-medicate. So the older adult is aware that they're not getting the sleep that they need. And so they are, having a nightcap, using alcohol as to self-medicate to help improve their sleep. But what I'm showing you here is that alcohol it will actually help you fall asleep. And there's a dose-dependent impact. The more you drink, eventually after the buzz, you are going to get very sleepy. But what I want you to notice is that the deep sleep and the REM sleep are altered dramatically by alcohol. And this wasn't a huge amount of consumption that was reported by the individual. And what you can see is they do get some deep sleep early, but not a lot. really only 32 minutes. And that's about half of what this individual would normally get. And then when we look at the REM sleep, you can see that the REM sleep is dramatically impacted by this alcohol consumption. And so what happens is the individual is able to get sleep, but they're not getting the proper healthy sleep architecture. So they're not getting the full benefit of that sleep. So alcohol certainly has an impact on our sleep. And I'll show you some data, some of my data a little bit later on, what excessive, or well, I wouldn't say excessive, but more than just a little bit of alcohol can do. There is, again, this dose-dependent response. This is a different drug. This is stimulants, and in this case, this is Adderall. So this individual is on ADD meds. And so what we're seeing here is that the timing of their ADD meds is actually having a huge impact on their sleep architecture. So you can think amphetamine essentially. And what's happening here is that there is still a high level of the drug in the individual's system. And so it's inhibiting not only their REM sleep and their deep sleep, but it's actually fragmenting the sleep window. There are these repeated awakenings, brief awakenings throughout the sleep window, in particular in this front half when the drug is wearing off. And so it isn't until the back half that we see, a better staging or sleep architecture. And so the takeaway message here is that drugs that you take during the day, and in this case, the individual was taking the drugs, in the mid-morning to late morning. So thinking that the drug would be out of their system by the time they went to bed, we can see with the Fitbit data that that drug was still in their system and having an impact on their sleep. And so there's this knock-on negative impact where the individual isn't getting the sleep that they need. So in the morning, they're feeling fatigued and tired. And so they're more dependent on the drug to reduce that cognitive fog. And so what we did with this individual was alter the timing, working with their physician, alter the timing and the dosing of the drug so that they could get better sleep. This is my data here, and this is actually just from just a few months ago. So allergy season came early for us, and I had a particularly bad bout of it this year. And so it's not going to be a surprise to you that I do try to limit the drugs that I take so that I can have the best sleep possible. But sometimes you just have to take drugs to address, what's going on. In this case, I was taking antihistamines. And so the antihistamines were actually helping me. You can see this awakening here was just a really bad allergy attack that was in the middle, or not quite the middle, but a couple of hours after going to sleep. And the antihistamines did help, but you can see that there is an impact. If you think back to the, what I shoot for in terms of elite sleep, I'm shooting for 90 minutes to 2 hours of REM sleep. And so I was about 50% of my target here. And in terms of deep sleep, I'm really looking for about 60 minutes to 90 minutes in terms of my deep sleep. And you can see that I was well short of that. The antihistamines certainly were having an impact. But what I want to show you in the next slide, I very often get the question, well, can you make up for a poor night's sleep? Or if you haven't been doing things, you haven't been able to get your sleep either because of your schedule or stress or whatever it might have been, can you rebound? And so I'll show you after several nights of taking antihistamines to, help me get through the night with these allergy attacks, I was able to come off the drug. And here's the first night after taking antihistamines and not using them. And what you can see is that I had this huge REM rebound. So I had accumulated a REM sleep debt from taking the antihistamines. And so I'm going to introduce this concept to you, my sleep accountant. You'll talk more about this later today, but it's this physiological process that's tracking our sleep-wake history and balancing the books, if you will. And what happened during my antihistamine use, I was not getting the REM sleep I needed. And then after I cleared those drugs from my system and went to sleep that night, you can see just a massive amount of REM sleep. This is, 40 minutes more than I would typically get, paying off that sleep debt. If you do a great job of protecting your sleep window, you'll be able to pay back sleep debt. And so that's what you're seeing in this example. This is an example of a REM rebound. Note that I'm still getting just about 60 minutes of deep sleep, but not the full amount of deep sleep that I would normally get, because the sleep accountant is paying off. It's prioritizing this REM sleep. Here's another example of my sleep data. And this was also a few months ago. I need to give you a little bit of history on this one. So a few years back in 2018, I was doing a sleep session and a tree fell on our house. Actually, that's my bedroom door there. I'm in a loft office here. But a tree struck the house and went through our bedroom. And it was absolutely a traumatic event, incredibly frightening. It was fortunate that, I was in the house alone, and, the tree strike hit the bedroom and not here. So, I was able to escape unharmed, but definitely, seeing the tree through the house, it didn't go completely all the way through the house, just the bedroom, but it was traumatic. And so there is this residual impact. You can think of this as, post-traumatic, and this is involuntary, but whenever there is a stormy night, we live on the edge of a watershed. So our backyard is really a forest. And so there are a ton of trees. And whenever it's really windy, you can hear the branches falling on the roof. And so this was an example where these awakenings here were so brief that I wasn't really aware of it. But what you can see is that this sleep architecture is nothing like what I would normally have. And I didn't feel rested in the morning. It felt like it was a stressful night. But when you look at the sleep architecture, you can tell exactly why. This is a hyper state of hypervigilance. It's a hyper state of awareness. So this is me in fight or flight mode while sleeping, if you will, being aware of this risk that a tree could, fall on the house again. And so once again, impacted. So our sleep architecture can be impacted involuntarily without the, use of drugs, just by a hyper state of awareness. And so that's an example. Here's another example of my sleep data. I told you about this earlier. This is, what I'm labeling as debauchery, but this was a night. I did this in preparation for, our talk today, so that you could see the impact of going out on a bender and really celebrating with friends and drinking and eating late and having a great time celebrating. And what you can see is, no deep sleep whatsoever. Again, this was, I like IPA. That's my beer of choice. And this is after several IPA in a safe environment. But, you can see that the sleep data, I went to bed late, had the ability to sleep in the morning in terms of my schedule, but there was just no way. This is the impact of alcohol. It negates your ability to get a healthy sleep window. There's some REM, but not really much. And the deep sleep is negated. But here's what recovery sleep looks like. This is the next night after that, going out on a bender. And you can see that because I've done such a good job building a sleep window, protecting that sleep window. And one of the things that I did that previous night, you can see, is that I still managed to drag my ass out of bed, got out. This was actually in San Diego. I was there for an event, and this is the night after all of the event is done, celebrating with the group and friends. And so I had the ability the next morning, got up, dragged my ass out of bed, as I said, and went on the beach and, went for a walk and cleared the cobwebs, if you will. And then the very next night was able to get an awesome sleep, lots of deep sleep recovery, lots of REM sleep recovery. And that's, yet another example of how, if you don't get the sleep you need, as long as you've done the things necessary to build a sleep window, protect that sleep window, we'll talk all about this in the next session, but building and protecting that sleep window, your sleep accountant's going to get the ability to actually pay off that sleep debt. Now, I've been talking about this sleep accountant for a bit here, and so now let's really get into what a sleep accountant is. So think of this as I call it the sleep accountant, but really it's a physiological process that we have. And its job is to track our previous sleep-wake history to determine, what the sleep debt is. And not only that, I've been talking throughout the last two talks, I've been talking about, elite sleep. One of the things that I want you to understand is that no 2 days are the same. And so the notion of, always getting the same sleep architecture, well, that's false. Everybody's different. Our sleep needs will vary by individual, but not only that, they'll vary by what kind of day we've had. So some days are incredibly stressful. Other days might involve a ton of new learning, or say there's been an incredibly physically draining day or emotionally draining day. All of these days require a different kind of sleep architecture because sleep staging accomplishes different things. And so that's an important point that I want you to understand. And really what you need to do is you need to do whatever it takes to help your sleep accountant. And I've said this a couple of times today, and we are definitely going to be addressing this in our next session. But the thing that you need to focus on is not so much worrying about your sleep architecture and your sleep staging. You want to trust that your sleep accountant's going to get the job done and then verify it with your Fitbit data, for example. But your job is really to build a sleep window and protect that sleep window so that your sleep accountant can predict the sleep window and can prepare your brain and body for that sleep window, and then just leave that to your sleep accountant to figure out the sleep architecture that you need given your previous sleep-wake history and what your day looked like. All right, so how are we going to, we talked about this, how are we going to build and protect your sleep window? Well, for the next section here, we're going to be talking about sleep hygiene. And sleep hygiene, there's sleep hygiene is just a set of behavioral practices that, will have an impact on your sleep. They can have a good impact or a negative impact. Now, most of us know the things that we want to avoid, like, obviously you don't want to be taking drugs before sleep. And we've covered that in today's session. We looked at some of the impacts of things like alcohol and stimulants and sleep aids, for example. One thing I didn't mention that I should have is that when we looked at the stimulants section, I gave you the example of Adderall. But things like nicotine and caffeine will have similar impact in terms of fragmenting your sleep window. And so what we're going to do here is focus on a healthy, good sleep environment. And so we're looking at good sleep hygiene. This part of, this section, I know many of you will have heard about these things, and they're really just about creating a sleep-friendly environment, a safe place for sleep. Many of you will know that a comfortable bed is critical, a very dark room, a very quiet room, and neutral temperature. So this is going to be repeat information for many of you, but you might find some new information here. Key message is that all of this is much more critical for shift workers, because shift workers are going to be forced to try to sleep during the day between their night shifts. And so making sure that you eliminate any disruptors is critical. So let's really do a deeper dive into this. A comfortable bed. Well, this one clearly too small. You want to have a bed that gives you enough room. People need to understand this. We move throughout the night. And so a bed that we aren't cramped in is going to be important. There's this phenomenon called group sleeping, if you will, where families are sleeping together. And this actually is, there is a camp that thinks that, this is good for creating, a social network where, the family is bonding. But what I would tell you from a sleep health perspective is that group sleeping is not the ideal here in terms of being able to promote your own individual sleep health. And in particular, if you've got pets in the bed or if you've got kids, young kids in your bed, it's going to be a massive disruptor. Kids will move around much more. Even your bed partner, if this is your spouse, can really, when we talk about age-related impacts, can have a huge impact. So things when you were younger with your partner, things that wouldn't have disrupted your sleep as you get older, your environment, your arousal threshold decreases. So any disruptions in your environment can have a much greater impact. So this is a key driver of poor sleep, can be the sleep environment. Another point, the couch is not a bed. And we very often with clients will have individuals that will start their sleep on the couch in front of the TV. And then after having fallen asleep for a bit, get up and go to bed. And we don't recommend this because it fragments the sleep window needlessly. Starting your sleep episode in one place and then going to another is not a great idea. So the couch is not a bed. But one thing I'll mention to parents is very often I'll hear from parents that they, will tuck their kids into bed and they, will begin that nightly routine with their kids, and sometimes will actually fall asleep in their kid's bed with their kid and then get up and go about, the rest of their evening. That can be a huge disruptor to sleep as well. So this, not a bed. What we're really trying to shoot for in the bed is that, and as we get older, our aches and pains increase. And so you want to make sure that the mattress technology has improved dramatically in the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, actually. And so making sure that you've got enough room, that it's the right, mattress for you in terms of it's not too soft and not too hard. You've got exactly what you're looking for. That's important. This is not going to be a surprise, but what I want to show you is the impact of light. So this is Motion Watch data here. And what I want to really emphasize, this yellow bar that you didn't see in the earlier depiction of the Motion Watch data, this yellow bar is light. And this, what we've done is we've set this light to the level that would actually have an impact on your wake promoting area of your brain. So light turns on the wake promoting areas of your brain and turns off the sleep promoting areas of your brain. And that's why it's it has such a huge impact on your sleep. And so the first thing to really focus on is the light level before bedtime. So again, the pink shaded area is when the person's going to bed and actually trying to sleep. And what we see in this section right here is that the individual, and this is just watching TV at night before bed, but the big screen LED backlit TVs are really a very high source of what we call blue light, and blue light has a huge impact turning off the sleep promoting area of the brain. And so that is a key function in, it's important to decrease the blue light level prior to going to bed. We talked a little bit about this last time when we talked about the impact of melatonin preparing the brain for sleep, and light, in particular blue light before bed, inhibits melatonin. The other thing right here, you see these are bathroom visits, and this is a product that kind of blows me away. Look at this product. It's a night light for your toilet, but they've made the poor choice of using blue light, which would actually turn off melatonin. So this is not a product that I would endorse. If this had been a red light, that would be a much better choice for, the bathroom light, because that wouldn't turn off melatonin. And then the other impact, and this is certainly timely right now as day length is beginning to increase, as we get closer and closer to summer and the longest days of the year, sunrise happens very early. And so that this will actually shorten our sleeps as well. So having a truly blacked out bedroom is critical if we're going to extend our sleep window and get the full sleep window that we want to get. And in particular for shift workers, and many of you will know this already, it's critical if we're going to try to sleep during the day between our 2 night shifts, we need to make sure that we've got a very dark environment. And then finally, we'll talk, or sorry, not finally, but the next thing we'll talk about is a quiet room, making sure that daytime noises are not impacting your daytime sleep window that you've scheduled between the 2 night shifts. We'll talk more about this in the next session, but the key point here is that, again, as we get older, it takes less and less to awaken us. And so if we're going to protect our sleep window, we need to make sure that we've got a really quiet room. And ear protection is highly recommended. There's lots of, different ways to do that now. In fact, you can combine, noise reduction and light reduction with different products. So that's key. Now, the final thing I'm going to talk about is, and this might be the piece that you haven't heard before. I'm going to just give you a brief introduction to one of really cool study where this was some highly dedicated researchers. And what they did is they went into a subterranean cave and they eliminated all time cues. So they had no external time cues of day versus night. And then what they did is they were able to set their own schedules in terms of when they would go to bed and when they would get up, and they had no time cues whatsoever. And each dot here is a sleep window in terms of when they went to bed. This right here is the core body temperature rhythm. Remember from our last talk, we really, and if you didn't get that, I do recommend going back to that talk and using the recording to refresh on that talk. But core body temperature rhythm is a key circadian rhythm. Remember, circadian rhythms, daily biological rhythms. We have daytime physiology, biology, and behavior. We have nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. What we're looking at here is the peak in body temperature and then the core body temperature minimum. And here you can see the sleep durations. And now what's really remarkable here is that there were periods of time where the individual slept for incredibly long sleeps, 20 hours of sleep. Whereas here, the individual got very short sleeps. And there's lots to talk about here, and I cover this in my Surviving Shift Work course. But what I want you to notice is this zone right here. When the individual initiated sleep at their core body temperature max, you'll see that they had their longest sleeps, their best sleeps. There were 0 short duration sleeps during that time. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but basically what's happening is the individual is falling asleep at the right time, the right circadian time for their sleep. So they end up with their best sleeps. Now, from a neutral temperature perspective, what I want you to understand here is that our best sleeps happen when we go to bed in an environment where we're at our temperature max and we're allowed to begin this cooling process. So you don't want to be in a room that's too hot that stops you from being able to have this decline. But at the same point, when we get to this point here, when our body temperature is approaching its body temperature minimum, we don't want to have the room so cold that we're now waking up. So remember from that earlier talk, when we go to sleep, we're typically properly timed sleep. We're going to bed when our body temperature is maxed out and it begins this long decline. And we have this body temperature minimum just a couple of hours before our normal wake up. So this is where we get our best sleeps, when we are going from a max and then we reach our lowest point just a couple of hours before waking up. So the key takeaway message here is that we have to have a neutral temperature so that we can still get this decline, but that we don't wake up because it's too cold in the room. All right. Now, just to summarize and really finish this part of the talk before we get to your questions, I want to start the process toward how you go about improving your sleep. So promoting strong circadian regulation is the key. And there really are some time cues that you can use to make sure that your brain and body, remember, brain and body need to be ready for sleep at the time we've scheduled it. And so it's important that we make very clear to these clocks, these pacemakers, that day is day and night is night. And so telling your clock what time it is very consistently is critical. And obviously this is really important for shift workers. So day is signaled by, not a surprise here, the solar day night cycle is absolutely critical. Day is signaled by lots of exposure to daylight. It's also signaled by exposure to food, access to calories. And so meal timing is really important. And then this time cue here, physical activity, is an important time cue. It's not as potent as light and food, but it is an important time cue, and day is signaled by activity. And then the reverse, night is signaled by the absence of light, the absence of food, think fasting now, and the absence of activity, think sedentary time. So it's important for us to coordinate our time cues in terms of exposure to light, meals, and physical activity so that we're very consistent in terms of telling our clock, this is day and this is night. And we will show you in the next talk exactly how to do that within a shift work paradigm. The main message that I want you to take away is that it's critical to be consistent. In order for our brain and body to be ready for sleep and to use that sleep window to get the best sleep possible, our brain and body need to predict our sleep and to be consistent. One more thing to talk about is naps. Naps are a great way to promote strong sleep health. The key there is that naps need to be properly timed. Naps should be the afternoon lull, that period. Now, everybody's going to be a little bit different, but typically for someone, say, going to bed at 11 o'clock and getting up at 7, the nap window would be somewhere between, I would say, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. It's that time, you'll know the afternoon lull for you because it's that time when you typically are reaching for caffeine or stimulants like nicotine, Red Bull energy drink or Monster Energy. When you feel that cognitive fog in the mid-afternoon lull, That's your nap window. And what's a good nap? It's a properly timed nap. And that would be, 60 minutes, 45 minutes, probably the sweet spot, not longer than 90 minutes. All right, so let's bring all of this together. What we want to do is build a sleep window and protect that by making sure that we have lots of strong cues telling our brain and body that day is here, signaled by lots of UV protected exposure to sunlight during the day. We want to be very routine about our meal times. Forgive the gender bias here, but breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. Key point, we want to have a long gap. I will be reviewing this in the next talk, but a long gap from our final meal to our scheduled sleep window. The reason for this is that there are these knock-on impacts of having had a meal. It's not that it takes 4 to 5 hours to digest your meal, but there are downstream impacts that alter our sleep. And then finally, we want to make sure that we use the food we eat. So our activity after meal times, you want to get the majority of your calories consumed in front of the most active part of your day. And then you want to remember the importance of melatonin that prepares our brain and body for sleep. So we want to preserve that melatonin rise by making sure that we avoid light throughout the night. And we can do that by blue blocking, and that is possible even in a shift work paradigm. And so we'll be talking much, much more about this in the talk to follow. But for now, I'll end there and open it up for your questions.
I'm here, sorry, just clicking over. All right, so we do have a few questions. I can start from the top and I'll do some theming of them for you. But right at the very top, the first question that came in was, do nightmares typically occur while in REM sleep? And thus, is it a byproduct of processing trauma?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's an awesome question. So here, I'm going to try to address that. So I'll go to, so that dream state that the questioner is referring to, those nightmares, especially if we're talking about recurring nightmares. So that's a function of trauma, where we can have this. One way to look at it is it's like a virus scan for a computer that's done at night when the individual isn't using their computer. And so in the event that the virus scan isn't able to complete the processing, if it gets stuck in a loop, what'll happen is it'll continue to try to rerun that virus scan. Well, the same kind of process, if you will, is happening where this REM sleep is removing the negative tag associated with a new learning event. So think trauma, think sympathetic nervous system overdrive, and what that nightmare, what the dreams are doing are trying to process that trauma, trying to remove that negative emotional tag. So the relationship between sleep health and PTSD, being able to process that trauma and being able to promote really strong REM sleep is critical. Yes.
Okay, thank you. A member would like to know what your thoughts are on white noise or other types of machines such as that.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Thank you for that. All right. So when we're talking about white noise generators, the impact there, what they're really trying to do is address intermittent noise in the sleep environment, right? So this is a way of creating a noise-free environment by having this standard state or steady state noise. And the intent there is that we will habituate to that level of noise so that we'll ignore it. Here's the thing. If it works for you, I'm all for it. But one thing I want you to be aware of is age-related change, in the sense, if you recall, I was saying earlier that we do, as we get older, have this decreased arousal threshold. And there's another factor that can play into this, and I'm just going to take you into the sleep stages for a second. But notice that we're not in a steady state of sleep architecture. There are these different stages. In deep sleep, our brain is disconnected from our environment, and we're in a deep level of processing. Remember, we're washing our brain during that time. So it takes a lot to wake us up out of this state. But when we're in this level of sleep, this light sleep, we are much more connected to our environment. And as we get older, our arousal threshold decreases to the point where it doesn't take very much at all to wake us up. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that it is possible that if you're using a white noise generator to help you take away the outside noise, it is possible that when you get older, when you transition from deep sleep to light sleep, you may actually become more aware of that white noise generator. And so it actually, what I would say is, if you feel like it's not working for you, it isn't. And that could be one of the reasons why. So again, a lot of the things that we talk about here are going to vary from individual to individual. What we're doing with this series is giving you the tools and really helping you understand that there are things that you can do. But it does require, in some cases, some added level of care. And so, and we're there to help you if that's the case. But yes, white noise generators can be helpful, but they might actually inhibit sleep as you get older.
Thank you. Another member has asked, what causes the initial waking up after someone has slept for some time? And does napping not throw off our circadian rhythm?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I won't do this very often, but our next talk is really going to get into what's driving those changes, age-related changes in sleep health, and also the impact that shift work has on circadian regulation, and really working to address those things. I'll answer the question briefly by saying this. One of the mechanisms that drives our sleep health is a homeostatic mechanism. The longer you've been awake, the greater your need for sleep, if you will. And so what happens is, if that were the only mechanism that drove your sleep health, then what would happen is an individual would be up for a few hours, but then build up this sleep need that would make them sleepy, and then they'd sleep for a few hours. And so you would get this highly fragmented sleep-wake rhythm, which is what we see in Alzheimer's. And it's also what you see as the progression as we get older, is that adults become more homeostatic, where they're able to sustain sleep for a few hours and then they can't. And then they're able to sustain wakefulness for a few hours, but then they get sleepy. So it is this progression toward a more homeostatic sleep drive that impacts our sleep health. And so that's really what's driving this, being able to sleep for a few hours and then waking up and not being able to get back to sleep. The answer to it is to get stronger circadian rhythms, and I'll explain it in our next session why that's so important. But it works to counterbalance that homeostatic sleep drive.
Perfect, thank you. Someone is asking, is there such a thing as too much sleep? Can too much sleep be a problem?
Yeah, so another great question, and that was actually raised in the Q&A from last session. And so thanks for bringing that question up again. I did say that I would address it. So here's what I would say to that. Everybody's sleep need varies to some degree, but not really necessarily as much as some might think. Generally speaking, 99% of us require somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of actual sleep. If you're getting less than 7 hours of actual sleep each night, you're probably accelerating aging. if you are finding yourself getting more than 9 hours of actual sleep and still feeling like you aren't getting enough, there's probably an underlying condition that is driving a need for sleep that's beyond that. So what I would say is that, you know, the vast, and I mean the vast majority of us need 7 to 9 hours actual sleep. If you find yourself needing much more than that, what it means is that there's something going on that's driving a greater sleep need. So sleep durations that are longer than 9 hours actual are an indicator of poor health status.
Okay, thank you. Someone is wondering if taking a melatonin supplement would be beneficial.
We will absolutely be covering this in the next session, but it's such an important topic. I'll address it right now, and I'll say the issue with taking melatonin, remember the last 2 talks now, I've been saying that melatonin is really important. So the natural question is, well, if it's so important and if we're not getting enough of it, then shouldn't we take it? Here's the thing. It's unfortunate, but if you were to take melatonin before bed, an hour to 2 hours before bed, it'll help you fall asleep. So you can get into this sleep staging here that I've got. But the problem is that when you take melatonin a couple of hours before bed, it has a chronobiotic property. What I mean by that is it actually changes our circadian timing, and it causes us to wake up earlier than we would otherwise wake up. I'll give you the example in terms of Vancouver versus Toronto time zone. Let's say if someone in Vancouver takes melatonin before bed to try to help them get an 8-hour sleep. What it does is it'll help them fall asleep, but it'll wake them up Toronto time. It causes about a 3-hour advance. And so what's going to happen is the person will wake up. They'll feel like they're ready to go, but they won't have actually gotten the full 8-hour sleep window. So it's another one of those things where we talk about building and protecting a sleep window so your sleep accountant can balance the books. When you take melatonin, you are artificially shortening the sleep window.
Okay. And I think there was one question that came in. It was just before 2. So if you can remember, Dr. Landry, what you were talking about there. This member would like to know what's a good neutral temperature? 20 degrees, 21 degrees.
Yeah, so this actually varies from individual to individual. So I can't give you the temperature that's going to work best for you, but yeah, it's going to be in that somewhere between 20 22 degrees, something in that range. But it's really something where I'll give you these tips, but it's up to you to become your own sleep expert. And you have to try different things to figure out what works best for you. There is no one size fits all. I think that's the most important thing. And the other thing to keep in mind is that yours and your bed partners may be very different.
Thank you. And the very last question for today is, how does serious tinnitus affect our sleep pattern, our deep sleep and our REM?
Okay, so I am not an expert in tinnitus, but I can tell you that it can certainly have an impact in terms of disrupting your sleep. And there is a bidirectional relationship here. So in the same way that pain can disrupt a person's sleep, there's this bidirectional relationship where people that are getting less sleep have less pain tolerance, and people that have better sleep quality have a higher pain tolerance. That same relationship exists in terms of the mental health spectrum, in terms of people that have really good sleep and have done what they could to protect their sleep. They have more resilience to stressors and trauma. And so what I would tell you is that there is this relationship. There's no doubt that tinnitus is going to have an impact on your sleep health, but by removing all other factors that decrease your sleep health, you could improve your sleep health status, and that might be a factor in terms of improving your lived experience of tinnitus. And I can tell you, I've had clients that have had tinnitus, and by promoting strong circadian regulation, they were able to cope better with it. That was their reporting of it. Again, I'm not an expert in tinnitus, but I do have some experience with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Landry, for sharing all of your expertise. You undoubtedly have a tremendous amount of information to share with everybody.
Yeah, I apologize. You know, we're all drinking from a fire hose when we're doing these sessions. They're very brief, and there's just a ton that I'm trying to, you know, translate for you.
You're doing a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do want to remind everyone that the session has been recorded, and we will save it on the Encompas website, so you can go back and rewatch it. There were 2 more questions that came in right at the very end. Those questions will be given to Dr. Landry, and with the posting of the recording, we will answer those questions as well. So that'll be posted in the same spot. The final session for you, I guess, will be Wednesday, June 22nd, and it will be at 1 o'clock. Again, it'll be a 75-minute session. It'll run till about 2:15, and Dr. Landry is hoping to focus on the secret of sleep health. I want to thank everybody for their time and participation today. If you have any further questions, please email them in, and you can also call Encompas at any time at 1-866-794-9117.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your day, everyone.